Poor Things is a 2023 film directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, equal parts feminist polemic and existential allegory, written by the wonderfully acerbic Tony McNamara of Hulu's original series, The Great, as well as Lanthimos' previous work, The Favorite. Poor Things tells the story of Bella, a woman who has the developing brain of a newborn with the adult body of a fully grown woman. This conceit allows for a biting and satirical look at many of the social mores of the modern industrial era, particularly those mores directed at women. The end result is a whimsical film that is tantalizing for its commentary, while also being unwilling to descend into true material conditions. Because the film resolutely follows Bella's development, Poor Things is able to be fantastical without leading too many viewers astray. Bella begins as a feral being and slowly grows into an astute and clever individual, all while having a great many things to say along the way that conveys the feeling of truth. Truth is a status that all artists should hope to pursue, as it represents the things that people know but do not realize that they know. This attempt at recognition of the facts of life is so prevalent in each scene of Poor Things that despite the apparent strangeness going on, one is liable to continue nodding their heads. What might be a little more difficult for viewers is the cinematic variety. Once again, Lanthimos applies his idiosyncrasies, most obviously his fishbowl lens effect prevalent in The Favorite, along with some other periscope-looking images, which I happen to think work better here than in his previous work. I preferred far more the use of color, costume, makeup, and set design, which builds upon the feelings of an allegory as Bella takes her nomadic journey from place to place. The alternative universe on display is decadent, bolstering Bella's bohemian and hedonistic approach in the middle of the film. I do think that the use of black and white for the prologue of the film was a mistake, as the color once we see it is so breathtaking that one wishes it began that way. Still, the film never, and I mean never, falters on its key vision, even to the point of ignoring possibilities in realism, which we'll get to. So I'll give it a 5 out of 5 for coherence. The tone of Poor Things is resolutely focused on black comedy. Bella slowly unveils the pleasures, horrors, and terrors of the world, from the guise of a liberated woman, for the reason being that she is a Frankenstein's monster plucked out of the conditions of society. Emma Stone easily earns her Oscar for her Best Actress for doing a variety of things, which include her unbalanced gait and feral behavior early, her erratic sexual appetites later, and her willingness to show her body perform these hungry maneuvers. And her chemistry and tension with Mark Ruffalo's character Duncan is hilarious. One such scene of Emma Stone dancing has some of the zaniest and best choreography I've seen in a film in years. As such, in order to enjoy this film, you kind of have to suspend your ego and really lean into your superego and id responses. You have to be willing to give in a little to those desires, like Bella, that society finds revolting when showcased so publicly. Equally, you have to absolutely commit yourself to Bella in the second half of the film, when she begins to ask the questions of the philosophers. The changeover of the film happens quite suddenly, and on a ship, almost as if we are being conveyed from one developmental phase of Bella into the next. Each scene feels emotionally and cognitively intentional in that way, and the richness of the subject matter discussed in the film is great stuff for rewatching. A 5 out of 5 for intensity of effect. For complexity, I'm going to be making some very subjective claims with easy counter-arguments, so bear with me. Poor Things sacrifices some complexity for the sake of its coherence. One way is obvious. The film literally has Bella's brain being swapped out for another. This hand-waving is ideal for speculative fiction, but some viewers may find this ridiculous. I think most people understand that, in order for a story to be told, some corners have to be cut, and therefore I don't mind at all. I use this point rather as a touchstone for another which may be a little more difficult to swallow. Poor Things is a feminist film, especially when it asks the question of sexuality. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to see that many societies are built around how they control and standardize women's sexuality. In the case of the 19th century especially, the repression of women's desire has been recognized in history and castigated by many cultural studies departments, and we all felt better about ourselves. And yet, here we are in the 21st century, still facing the difficulty of coming to terms with the perceived terror of a woman's desire liberated. I think Poor Things is heroic for addressing these questions, but I also think that here is where the allegorical underpinnings of the film do the subject matter a disservice. At one point, Bella becomes a prostitute in Paris. The The first thought I imagined was that Bella would contract one or several sexually transmitted diseases, or would become pregnant. Pregnancy could have been handled with a line about how, as an infant in an adult body, it seemed in poor taste to give Bella the possibility of being a mother, and so they removed that ability from her. Well, that's all well and good, and this choice would opportunistically raise some interesting philosophical questions about antinatalism, and the idea that, though anyone can have a child, being a good parent is another ordeal entirely. But the issue of an STD is mentioned and continuously put off in the film. One of the problems with this dilemma is the very fact that feminism has always been concerned with material conditions. This is made explicit in Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, when she talks about how, in order for a woman to achieve artistic independence, one needs 500 pounds and, you guessed it, a room of one's own. Now, as far as finances are concerned, Bella is fine, excepting that brief stint in Paris where she sells her body sexually. And here, when the film could have risked descending into tragedy, the film remarks upon it and then rebounds rather quickly, back into material solvency, without delving into the problems of being a woman in our social, but more importantly, economic system. Now, on the one hand, it's a movie. It's an allegory, a sort of feminist fairy tale, and I do not want to shit on the things that I believe Poor Things has done well. Equally, it is a poor critique to mention what something doesn't have, rather than what it does at a low quality. On the other hand, women all throughout history find themselves tied down to the requirements of society, in particular the social ideas of purity, of childbearing, and family raising, of the labor of the home, that Lanthimos and McNamara have to devise formal structures around in order for this feminist story to take place at all. Bella is barely a daughter, certainly not a mother, except a mother, strangely, to herself. We learn that she is in fact a wife, though this is brought up and put down playfully. It's a minor point to make, but hopefully you can see how, through this perspective, this is why I believe The Favorite to be a rather more interesting film in the way that it subjugates the female characters to bleak economic structures, as they pine for the favor of the queen, and even when that favor is garnered, it results in a trade-off, and not necessarily a win. In Poor Things, Bella wins, beyond question. That success is fun to watch, but it comes with its own limitations. This is clearly a subjective point on my part, and represents at a basic level the difference between realistic fiction and fantasy. I should therefore also say that just because a work of fiction is fantasy, that doesn't make it any less complex. There's a reason we continue to return to Grimm's fairy tales, for example. The problem that we have with fantasies, like Poor Things, is that often these complexities will happen in hindsight, once our contemporary lens is lost and we can begin to view the film with the help of our historical context. I think the thing we really should consider in fiction, and that you should think about in agreeing or disagreeing with me, is the following. Can we talk about sex without talking about its material conditions? Fairy tales are one thing, but women's sexuality, having sex and enjoying sex, might be another. In that light, I gave Poor Things a 3 out of 5 for complexity. After finishing Poor Things, I was shocked to find that the Academy nominated it at all. It is so bizarre, so tantalizing, but in all the dirtiest ways, that I could not help but smile and respect the film even more. Somehow Poor Things managed to slip past the conservative veil of enough people to be discussed in the internet forums and social media spaces. That's got to count for something. I myself prefer, because of my suburban upbringing, the more genteel work of something like Paul Thomas Anderson's Phantom Thread, or Celine Sciamma's Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Regardless, I think it is difficult to find other works quite like Poor Things. Other viewers have rightly found some visual similarities to Terry Gilliam, though this feels more like a branching off point than an homage. I thought just now of that strange 2005 film Domino starring Keira Knightley, who becomes a bounty hunter. One can see that many Hollywood versions of a feminist woman cannot help but be steeped in stereotypes that make the female character as unapproachable as to remain in myth. Here, Bella equally does not seem approachable. She is a strange person. But I think her observations and her wit are provocative and magnetizing. Thanks to McNamara, Bella does have some things to remind us. And for that, I would give Poor Things an originality of 5 out of 5. Poor Things is such a rich film, like having dessert for all 3 courses of the meal. It is easily worth talking about, perhaps for what it says, despite what it leaves out. The visual imagery is stunning, the sets and costumes and design is impeccable, The performances from Stone, Ruffalo, and Willem Dafoe, including several side characters, are all firing full blast. It's a wild ride, contained smartly within a writer and director who have poured new life into historical fiction that reminds us why good writing has always been king. A combined score of 4.5 out of 5 represents a stellar achievement in the situation that is Bella, if it perhaps leaves out some important problematics. Thanks for watching.